From the great halls of their house, there are assembled three who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision, Bill Fisher. Their soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicki Fisher. Our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Skripchuk. And our Batman, the master of tools, gadgets, and all things mechanical, our mild-mannered soon-to-be billionaire, Alan Danvers. Their mission, to fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them, and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Captain's Log Supplemental.
So, Bill, guess what?
What?
We did the Sentinel. We did the Sentinel.
We did.
How
did you like it?
You know what? We were talking about the Sentinel.
We have.
It was great. We understood watching how the Sentinel works, but we finally got it into our car, and I got to tell you, that was really awesome. I was able to see every one of my mistakes.
We have hours of them.
We have hours of my mistakes,
Right.
but we have hours of good stuff too, which is awesome. It actually showed us the speed. Did it show us where we were on track?
We were streaming it
We were streaming it live.
We're boring billions of people across the world.
But it was pretty incredible. Plus, on it, you're able to put your insignia, your logos on your app also, and the clarity was amazing. It was really easy to put in, easier than I thought it was.
I know, you kept making a big deal out of it. I'm like, it's really not that hard. Until we focused on it, it wasn't too bad. And then we got some help.
No.
It was pretty easy.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
You know what? I like the stream because some of the tracks we go to don't have great cell phone coverage, but it's got a USB stick backup. So I just uploaded the high quality video without the cellular interruption. So if you watched us earlier and said, wow, they got from there to there really quickly, you can watch the real video and see that no, we didn't. It's just a cell phone went out. But
yeah. So the learning curve for me, obviously, I'm slightly techno-Amish.
Slightly.
When it comes to the wiring and stuff like that, but we get it in and I love it. We were able to sit there right at the track and watch what we were doing in the car. And that was amazing.
Which was good because if you have a problem with your radio, you can tell, if something is going on that you need to know about. Like a couple times we've had cars come in and we didn't know they were broken. And I know it's hard to imagine one of our cars being broken, but whatever. But you can watch the video, and even with the cell phone coverage we had at that particular event, it was like a 30-second delay. So it wasn't bad. And you can compare multiple drivers because you have each of the stints are broken up. So we got to work on not only our driving, but if we wanted to, we could work on our pit stops and see exactly what we do. And there's some things that we need to talk about as a team. And it was pretty good. Like I said, it takes me, once we got the wiring hooked up for the power, I probably could go from an empty shell to a full up setup running Sentinel. I could probably do that in like 20 minutes. So you could literally install it in a car before a race. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And we got to see the driver and the front windshield. And if we want to, we can have three. We can see backwards. Or one of the guys we were going to work with at the upcoming event, he said, could you put a camera on the driver's eyes so we could see what they're looking at? I said, why, yes, I can. Haven't done it yet, but I'll figure it out. We've got time.
Well, I love it.
All right. Very well. That sounds like I can buy another one then. Woo!
Dominating with Dawson.
Jeremy. Welcome.
I'm here.
You know who else is here?
Yep.
I know you do, because we have video. We should have a video podcast at some point.
Yeah.
And she's awesome.
She is. Miss Vicki.
Hi.
Putting up with me again. Who knows why?
Because you're awesome. Well, you're awesome.
That's not what we were saying. But anyway, it's part of the fun. Anyway, Miss Vicki, if there is one thing that even you, who denies having a mechanical talent or knowledge or skill or just being in training, or maybe an apprentice, or maybe an apprentice apprenticing, you minimize all of your mechanical talent, skill, and knowledge. Even you would say you know how to do brakes, rotors, pads, and bleeding.
I do.
Jeremy,
I would completely agree with that.
She said she does, Jeremy.
She does.
Is that the first time ever? I think that's the first mechanical thing she's ever said she knows how to do.
She does not give herself enough credit.
Any credit? None. Anyway, so I think this is kind of like the fundamental of fundamentals for racing a car on a track is the brakes, pads, rotors, maybe tire pressure and bleeding to brake. Right? I think that's kind of like if you need to know something, this is what you need to know.
That is track preparation 101.
Yeah. And you can go pretty far just on that little bit. So guess what? We're going to do a whole episode on it. I dominated with Dawson with no Dawson, but that's okay.
We miss him.
We do miss him.
I'm going to try my best.
He feels better.
Indeed. So brake pads. Let's do rotors first. They're the big round thing. Sometimes, Jeremy, we might as well talk about drums since you've had recent experience with drums for the first time in your life.
Oh, drum brakes. Oh, drum brakes are pain in the rear end.
Yep.
Get rid of them as quick as you can.
Oh my gosh.
The best thing you can do to adjust your drum brakes is turn them into disc brakes.
That is 100% accurate.
So Jeremy, what's a brake rotor? Just so everybody knows what it looks like.
So brake rotor is that big, huge, giant round thing that you look through your wheel and you see that's all nice and shiny.
It better be shiny.
That is what helps you stop your vehicle.
How does it
stop? You can go home that afternoon.
How does it stop? Because you know what? A lot of people never see that the brake rotor spins with the wheel because it's always sitting still when they're in their driveway.
Oh, yes. So you have your caliper. When you press that brake pedal, your fluid goes through, creates pressure inside that caliper. You have pistons in there that squeeze the brake pads onto that brake rotor to slow you down.
Would the brake rotor name itself imply that the thing is rotating, perhaps? Rotating.
Correct. Rotating with the wheel.
Potatoes.
That's why when you put a brake rotor on,
it
goes over your studs and stays over your studs. It doesn't just freely stay in there.
So while we're here, question from the audience. Some of these have these little screws that you mount the rotor to the hub. Some of them don't. Why? And do I need to put those screws on? Because those screws are a pain in the buttocks to get back off.
On a race car, absolutely not.
Okay.
They were created by some engineer somewhere that said, "Hey, look, we can make some company millions of dollars by creating these little tiny screws to hold these rotors on against the wheel bearing hub." To hold the rotor still so that you can put the rest of everything back on. So on a street car, if you're pulling it all apart and you have time, just put the screw back in. It just makes things a little simpler. On a race car, you take them out, don't ever put them back in. Just a waste of time.
Just the engineer in me says, I've got either 4 or 5 of these things called lug nuts, which will hold the wheel against the rotor. I don't think it's going to go anywhere that little screw is going to be able to do anything more than those 4 or 5 lug nuts.
Well, and that's correct. That, like I said, that screw was really only designed to hold it flat so that you could put your caliper back on with your pads in and make it easier so that the rotor wasn't sitting crooked when you were trying to put all that stuff back together.
Yep.
And that getting those screws out for the home game player, we were taught this, educated into what is called an impact driver. And I'm not talking about an impact driver gun. I'm talking about this little piece of metal, which has a screw Phillips head on the top, and you hit the thing with a hammer, driving it into the screw and hopefully getting that thing to rotate as opposed to...
They do end up rusting out quite fast, and
Especially
they end up
up here.
getting stuck in there. And,
Right.
Only because, they just, I don't, you know what?
It's the Northeast. It's just what it is.
It's the Northeast.
But
again, on a street car, why not? If you have it, just whatever. But on a race car, absolutely not. I mean, you could if you wanted to, if it makes you feel better.
It's not going to do anything bad, but it's
safer.
not necessary.
Yes.
It's definitely not necessary. A really good friend of mine, when I first started getting into racing, and I live in the Northeast, so everything rusts up there. And he was like, once you turn a car into a race car, nothing rusts anymore.
No.
And he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
Because you're always tinkering with it.
Brilliant.
Coming off.
Right. It's always, being raced. It's in a trailer. It's in a garage. It's, so it's not exposed to all of the terrible elements that are on the road. So therefore, if you really wanted to on your race car, you wanted to put that screw back in, go ahead. If it makes you feel safer. I don't ever use them.
Okay. All right. So we did rotors. Pads are
those hard metallic things that go into your they go in your caliper sits over them. And like I said before, it creates pressure. Your pistons create pressure against your pads, and they squeeze against your rotor from the backside and the front side. So you want to always check, if you're checking your pads, to make sure that you have enough pad on there. You always want to check both sides, because if you have a bad caliper, it will create uneven pressure on those pads, wearing out either the inside or the outside pad a lot faster.
or not parallel to the rotor.
Correct. And pads are a whole nother topic. Every team, every person, every vehicle reacts differently to different pads. There's a million of them out there on the market.
Yep.
They're, just find what works for you. In my opinion, the rotors, I just buy, in terms of rotors, in terms of, financing and pricing, factory rotors. This factory rotors are just fine.
Not drilled.
What's that?
Not drilled.
No, factory. I mean, if your car came factory with drilled rotors, sure. But with endurance racing, what we're doing, you want regular, basic steel, non-drilled, non-slotted rotors.
If you have a choice between a solid rotor and a vented rotor, you'd like to have a vented rotor.
Vented, absolutely.
Yes.
Yep, vented makes a big difference.
And explain what a vented rotor is.
Vented rotor is looking at it from if you're looking at a quarter, it's got the little lines on the edge. A vented rotor kind of has those lines, but it's also got some open space for air. So you can see into the rotor. There's two faces and a open-ish, fractionally open
center. A vented
center.
rotor is much thicker than a non, than a regular solid rotor. It helps to create airflow out away from the hub, the wheel bearing, and it gets it out away from everything.
Okay. And for the home game players who aren't jargon literate, the caliper that we've been talking about, it typically looks like a little clamshell or a C shape that goes over the rotor, and that's where the pads are held.
Correct. Inside that. Now the pads, you want to make sure, especially if you're on track, you need to make sure you have good track pads.
Not
your factory,
not your Duralast forever stop organic 1999 lifetime warranty.
Those aren't going to cut it. They're all going to overheat, and they're going to get greasy, and you're not going to be able to stop. Like I said, there's a million different types on the market. Everybody has their own feeling of what they like, what they want. And it usually also depends on your budget.
Usually quite strongly too. Yes.
Yep. A good budget friendly pad that I just recently started working with are the Ray Bestis ST43s and 45s. I've always been a PFC and a Hawk person. But on the truck, the ST43s and the 45s work absolutely fantastically. Each pad, again, is designed to do different things. The 43s are a good endurance pad. The 45s are an endurance pad as well, but they have much more initial bite, which means that when you first touch that brake pedal, they're going to clamp a lot. They're going to bite when they're clamped. They're going to bite a lot harder and slow you down faster.
And then what happens if you're not careful? You
If you're not
spot
careful,
your tires.
You flat spot your tires.
So we have an episode with Wendy from Porterfields earlier that goes over all that you ever wanted to know about brake pads and rotors. And
she is fantastic.
She is.
So for those of you listening
Girl
that have
knows her stuff.
She does. If you are just getting into this and you need track pads, call Wendy and she will walk you through everything and get you exactly what you need.
Oh my gosh, so knowledgeable. And what company is she with again?
Porterfields.
There you go.
Yep.
Indeed.
We'll put the link in the
show notes,
the description.
Exactly. Yep. That would be episode 59 for those playing a home game. Long time ago.
Right.
A long time ago. Wow. Okay.
So Jeremy, when I'm driving down the road, and I hear clicking after I put fresh brake pads on, what is that?
That means I did it. Sorry.
That means Bill did it.
Yeah.
Clicking.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Sometimes I would hear clicking in my brakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's rotational.
And it's rotational.
Yes.
Ooh.
So if it's rotation, it doesn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I stop and I start, I'll hear clicking. And then rotation, it's fine. Then I come to a stop. And I start driving again. I'll hear a click, click, click. Start rotating. What is that?
So is that your pad moving inside your bracket?
There is a good chance that could be it.
That could be it.
You
So typically on a street car, you have for your brake pads, you have various different types of springs or shims that you put in there to prevent the pad from moving around very much. So it's quiet, right? The idea of a street car, you want everything as quiet as possible. You don't want to hear anything working. On a race car, you just throw that stuff away. Don't even use it. It's not worth it. The pad's not going anywhere. And the more stuff you have, the longer it's going to take for you to do your brakes on the race car, especially if you have to do it in the middle of a race.
Indeed. So there's lots of things that can be done. So let's pretend that we're at a track or we're going to the track even, and we need to do a freshening up of our brakes. What would we do? Miss Vicki?
So
Oh,
it depends on what's that?
Go ahead.
Oh, it depends on how long it's been since you've done brakes, when the last time you checked them was. Vicki, what would you do?
About say
You're going to the track. Question. You're going to the track and you're checking your brakes. What do you do?
Well, first of all, when I'm checking my brakes, I would check my hold on, let me get my head clear. I would go ahead and first of all check my fluids on my brake.
Meaning?
I would check to see, I first of all, I do a brake bleed before I get on track. I would have to check my fluids to make sure that there isn't any color to it. Also, but it's always good in between races or periodically, however long, is to bleed your brakes anyway, especially after a race. Even during a race, it's always good. And then what I would do before going to the race is I would just double check how much I have on my brake pad, how much thickness I have on it. And that will determine on whether I can continue my race with it, or if I may have to put fresh ones on and they will become secondary. I could even use them for like an initial track day and halfway through change them out and put fresh pads on. But I would also check to see on the rotors if there's any cracks on it, like any fine line crack lines, if there is any heat soak lines or heat soaking on it, if the metal has changed color. And I would also check to see if there's any gouges in the rotor itself. And that will determine if I need to do a rotor change. Those are usually what I think needs to happen if the rotor needs to be changed. But on the brake pad, it's usually thickness and how much I have left on it, because I don't have a sensor on my car to tell me if I'm losing brake pads.
You can do rotor face thickness too.
Yes.
Right. So let me add one more thing. Not just your thickness on your brake pads. So there are a lot of brake pads out there that are not designed for what we do for endurance racing. Okay. So pull your brake pads out and you actually inspect your brake pads like you inspect your rotor, because a lot of track pads that are not designed for endurance racing, they actually get heat. They get heat cracks on them.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you've noticed that your pads have heat cracks on them because you're not using specific pads designed for endurance racing, it's a good idea to change them, because if they've already started cracking, they could just crack, and the pads, the metallic part of the pad, could actually start coming apart.
The other thing too is that, and this is not just on race cars, because I don't think it happens as often as we go through race cars, but other cars, when you start doing this, is you're going to find some gumming that ends up happening, or rust buildup that ends up happening on the edges of your brake pad, which actually inhibits the brake pad from moving freely in and out. So you might have to go in on those brake pads and in those areas where the holders are and kind of clean them out a little bit, and remove any other debris that's in there. Of course, putting them back in, we have to make sure that we grease, the pressure plates where the caliper, where the caliper meets on the pad, and then where we have to grease on the tips where they actually fit in. And of course, when we're doing our calipers, we have to go ahead and re-grease our pin that goes in there. Also, there's a pin that goes in, they have to pull out. So you have to grease that also. You got to make sure that's all lubed up in there, because you want that going in and out freely. And
right. You want everything to move freely.
Freely.
Now, like you said, on a street car, those are all places that you definitely want to grease. You want to make sure it's all there. On a race car, I don't waste my time putting any grease on. I make sure that the slides for the pads on the bracket are always clean. I file them out to make sure that they're perfectly clean, and that you have no edges of rust buildup, and make sure that everything moves freely. The only thing that we grease, and again, this comes down to personal preference. If you like putting grease everywhere, brake pad grease, do it if it makes you feel better. I don't do it. The only place we put grease are on the slides to make sure the caliper can always move freely.
Okay, so I think the last thing we should do for this segment is go over brake bleeding. It sounds tortuous, but that's not really what we're doing. And we've learned several different ways to do it, and some of them have advantages and disadvantages, and some of them are single person and some of them are two people. So guys, who wants to take the lead for brake bleeding?
I'm gonna let Jeremy take this one, because I failed at this once and it was terrible.
So brake bleeding, honestly, a lot of people overcomplicate it. The number one thing that I see issues with people when they're bleeding brakes, or even clutches, is that you have, each caliper has a bleeder screw on it. Okay. The issue that I always see is that people open that bleeder screw way too much, right? The only thing you need to do on that bleeder screw is just barely crack it, right? Just release the pressure of it being tight. And once you put pressure on your brake pedal or your pressure bleeder, fluid will come out of there. So that's the number one issue that I see with brake bleeding.
Why is it an issue?
Because a lot of times people they open it, and then what happens is, when you're bleeding, let's say you're manually bleeding the brakes, which is the old school way of doing it. And honestly, it works perfect every time. So let me tell you how a manual brake bleed works, and then I'll tell you the reason why we see issues with it. A manual brake bleed, two people, you have the car up on jacks, you have the tires off the car. You've just filled your fluid, your brake reservoir. You have one person in the vehicle. The person outside the vehicle is going to have the person inside the vehicle pump the brake pedal a few times, typically 3 times. I don't know where the number came from, but that's what everybody does. Pump it 3 times, push it as hard as you can, and hold it. Okay. The person outside the vehicle at the caliper cracks the bleeder, and you start at one corner, you work your way around all 4 corners. Do it 4 or 5 times until you see no bubbles, or you just see clean fluid coming out of that bleeder. So sometimes it might take 1 trip around. Sometimes it might take 2.
What is clean fluid versus dirty? Just to be extra clear.
I mean, dirty fluid is dirty fluid. You can tell it's black. It's just gross. Clear brake fluid.
Burnt,
You want it to come out. What's that?
It looks kind of burnt.
Yes, it looks kind of burnt. Absolutely. What I mean by clear fluid or clean fluid is you want the fluid coming out to look exactly like the fluid you're putting in.
Mm-hmm. So it's like usually like an off clear, but not very colored. It's
right. Some of them have like a little, well, I'm colorblind, but it looks like almost like a little yellow hue to it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So with that said, right, you do that. Sometimes it's only one time you do it around, but every once in a while you get some air bubbles in the lines that create a little bit of trouble for you. So it might take 2 times around. It might take 3. Who knows? But
right.
That's the simple, easy way of bleeding brakes. Typically, if you only do it once, and everything is perfect, you're very lucky. But it's very simple. It just can be time consuming. So where I'm talking about the issue that I see all too often is that when that person is cracking that bleeder screw open, a lot of times people will not just crack it, but they'll go a full half a turn to open it. Right. Now what you've done is you have now created a possibility for air to be sucked back through the threads back into the caliper. Right. So if you don't get that bleeder screw closed enough, well, if the person inside the vehicle starts pumping, you've created a situation where you could potentially suck air back in, or it's just looks like it's bubbling, like you have air in there because it's just bubbling out through, it's coming in the threads and just back out through with the fluid.
Right.
Okay. So it's just a light, tiny crack to release the pressure that you have created when you're tightening it that you want to do to bleed the brakes.
So you want to keep all the moving fluid and or air going through the fitting, not around.
Correct. Yep. Out through the fitting, not coming back in around the threads.
Yeah. Because if you open it enough, you could actually get the brake fluid to go out through the fitting threads.
Right.
And then that would just be a nightmare. So,
okay. And then it's not doing you any good.
Nope. Not helping you get where you need to be.
It is not. So the other very simple thing as well that you can do, one person, is you can use a pressure bleeder. So a pressure bleeder is a tank that you pour your brake fluid in. It's got a hose that goes up and it has a correct cap that screws onto your brake fluid reservoir, and you pump it up and it creates pressure. You open the valve on the line, and now you have pressure, constant pressure in your brake system. So you can do it yourself. You can just walk around and crack each bleeder screw, right? And just make sure that, every once in a while, check the container, make sure you still have fluid in it, and make sure that the pressure is still up so that it's pushing fluid from the reservoir down through all the lines and out the calipers.
So you don't need somebody pushing the pedal.
Correct.
In the car.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Miss Vicki, I believe one of our friends showed you another way to do a bleed that you've done by yourself.
The gravity bleed?
Exactly.
Oh, the gravity bleed. Bleed. Yeah. Gravity bleed it's tricky, but
I didn't say we were good at it. I just said he showed it.
No, I'm not saying that we're good at it. The gravity bleed is just basically just kind of opening up the line in such a way where it just kind of flows out without any air coming back into it. But it's tricky because you still risk, if you're not savvy with it, you still risk air getting back into the line, which is how I failed because I wasn't so good at it. And Jeremy, can you explain a gravity bleed? You could probably do a little better than I could.
So typically the only time I ever use a gravity bleed is when we have completely gone through a vehicle and replaced all of the brake lines. And by all of the brake lines, I don't mean your flex line or your stainless steel flex line at the caliper. I mean from the booster or the proportioning valve, whatever is up in the engine bay, to every single corner of the vehicle. So once all of your brake lines are all replaced, and you have all new parts, you have new calipers, you have all new lines, you have new everything. That's when I use a gravity bleed, because you want to get that fluid out if you don't have a pressure bleeder, right? You want to get that fluid to each caliper. It's going to take a while, especially if you're by yourself. So what you do is you crack each individual bleeder at each caliper, crack it just a little tiny bit, and you pour your fluid in your container. You let that fluid run down through, and it will eventually get to each individual caliper, filling all the lines and all the calipers. Once it starts trickling out, right? Typically the fronts are a lot closer, so the fronts are going to start trickling, first. Tighten the fronts up, let the fluid continue all the way back to your rear calipers. Once that's done, then you can tighten your rear calipers up, and that's what we mean by gravity. You allow gravity to just push the fluid all the way down through all the lines into each caliper on the vehicle.
And again, that requires nobody on the pedal. So sometimes, you got to do what you got to do sometimes.
Right. And sometimes you can get very lucky with, you can gravity bleed a vehicle, and you can get very lucky and have good brakes right out of the gate. If you don't, then you might want to phone a friend. Hey, can you come over and help me do this real quick, and just have them pump the pedal while you bleed each individual caliper by itself.
Right.
So I lied. I don't know that we went over why you're bleeding the brakes well enough. Why are we bleeding the brakes at all?
So fluid, especially on the racetrack, gets very hot. That's why, back to racetrack 101, the first thing you do is you replace your brake fluid with high temp fluid that is designed for use on a racetrack.
Dot four.
Right. If your car, .4, if your car takes whatever your car requires, but .4 is typically, what most cars are going to use. But it's a high temp fluid.
And this is one case where .5 is not better than .4. It's made for something else. Don't be tricked.
Right.
.4.
Right. So the fluid is designed in which, when you're on a racetrack, you're using your brakes a lot. And well, I mean, some people
a lot.
There's a lot of people that claim they don't, but neither here nor there.
That's a different episode.
So when you are using your brakes, you're creating a lot of heat, right? And that fluid is in those calipers where all that heat is, right? So that fluid is getting very hot. And it's very important, even though it's designed for that, it's very important to do a brake flush, which means that we want to get that, at least all that fluid out of those calipers and get it out of the vehicle, so that fresh, clean fluid coming through the lines is now in those calipers, so that you don't have fluid that is going to start to overheat.
Yeah, the one thing that I never really thought about until somebody said something, the brake fluid is not circulating. It is a dead end trip. So what's in the caliper near the piston where all the heat is never moves.
It stays right there. And that's why I said that.
Yeah, you just want to get that, it's done its time. It gets to go off and retire, and somebody else has to do the job after a while. And like, if it was somehow a flowing system or a circuit, it would be a whole different thing. It wouldn't be a great Blake, but that would be something different. You got to remember, this is a one-way dead end street, and that fluid is just sitting there getting cooked every time you hit the brakes.
Yep. And that's why it's very important to do brake flushes, depending on how much you use the vehicle. I would say every race, after every race, or every other race, depending on your vehicle, depending on the weight, depending on, the track. It's very cheap insurance, right? Because if for some reason you go to press that brake pedal, you don't have brakes, it can create a lot of problems.
It's an exciting opportunity.
Yes, it creates a very exciting opportunity for you to decide, or for you to figure out how much skill you actually have.
That's right. Were you really going through that turn at the limit, or did you just think you were going through the turn at the limit? You are about to find out.
Yes, very quickly too. So it's very easy. It's somewhat quick, and it's cheap insurance. And brake flushes, just do them. It's easy. Just do it.
Indeed. Miss Vicki, anything on brake flushing and brakes and rotors that we didn't?
Again, no, I think he covered it pretty well.
So it's almost like he should have his own segment. But then we got to do a T-shirt and all that. Nah, screw it.
Yeah,
Dominating with Dawson.
Yeah.
That's all right. Don't want him getting a big head with that big beard. All right. Very well. Dominating with Dawson with no Dawson.
No.
It's just not the same. It was
Ben,
very
we
nice,
miss
though,
you.
Jeremy. It was very nice, though, Jeremy. Just not the same.
No, it's not the same.
Indeed. You'd have to have a lot more hair on your head, sir.
Right. I would.
Right.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to email us, Garage Heroes and Training.
gmail.com.
Yep.
Indeed. And if you have some other thing that we don't ever answer, or perhaps a word or a piece of jargon, as we all know, Vicki's strong point in racing is her jargon. We can do those at any point.
We're getting there.
We are. Hey, she admitted she was actually good at something mechanically. So, inch by inch.
Yep.
Who knew? Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much for having me.